Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's LinkedIn audio event. This is Basil Al-Khalidi. I will be your host for today's event. I am heading the global supplement category with Fine Hygienic Holding. If you don't mind, if you listen to us clearly, can you just make thumbs up to make sure everyone is listening? Thank you. Great. So today is World Alzheimer Day. Through this event, we aim to raise awareness for this disease that 1 in 3 seniors die from or another dementia, as well as show you the steps that can be taken to help prevent Alzheimer's and maintain good cognitive function. The rate of Alzheimer has unfortunately drastically increased over the years, and it is assumed that the number of people experiencing Alzheimer's will double by 2050. Just to let you know, we will designate 15 minutes toward the end of the event to ask any question you may have. Now allow me to introduce our speaker. Today with us, Mr. James Michael Lafferty is the Chief Executive Officer of Fine Hygienic Holding and has often been described as one of the most unique and diversified CEOs in the world today. He is not only a successful CEO, he is an Olympic coach and award-winning journalist, a college professor, a competitive athlete, a philanthropist, husband, father of 6, and grandfather of 3. Mr. James will tell us a heartwarming personal story and enlighten us with a breakthrough research study on Alzheimer's. Without further ado, Mr. James, the stage is yours and you are most welcome.
Okay, thank you everyone, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're listening from, and thank you for joining us. Let me dive right into it. My name is James Michael Lafferty, as we talked, and I'm the CEO of Fine Hygienic Holding. Now, my whole history in my past is in physiology, wellness, and primarily coaching athletes, and still working today with a number of Olympic athletes in track and field. Now, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States, in the Midwest. I was born in 1963, and I was the 7th of 7 children, and my closest sibling was 9 years older than I. My oldest sister, by the time I was born, was already 24 and had 4 kids. So I was an uncle from the minute I was born. My father was 50 and my mother was 49. So I was, at that time, a record as the oldest natural birth mother at Christ Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio at the time. So I was born very, very late, and I was the youngest sibling by far, and my parents were quite aged. And when people say they had a normal upbringing or they didn't, I mean, who really knows? I would tell you I had a normal upbringing, but I guess in some respects it wasn't. There are a number of events, and you have to go back to the late 60s and early 70s when words like Alzheimer's and dementia were not in the national lexicon. Nobody was saying these things. Nobody ever heard of it. And obviously there was maybe older people, really old, would get senile, and the word senile was used. But dementia and Alzheimer's were not even words that were in the vocabulary at these genders. Now, I had a couple of poignant memories that I'm going to share with you about my mother that only in retrospect, only with the 2020 vision of looking in the rearview mirror can I understand what it meant. In 1970, so I was 7 years old, we were doing a across the country family vacation, which we did in the car. My older sister, who was still in the house, everybody else was out, stayed at home because of school and duties, and she was a teenager and wanted to stay home. It was just me and my mother and father, and as you know, the U.S. has a very good interstate system. There was these freeways that would go on for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, and so it was quite easy to navigate because there's a whole interstate system throughout the country. my father would be driving, and at some point he would get tired, and he would want to turn it over to my mother, and he would want to make it easy. He would pick the right time to switch and go into the passenger seat and sleep. And he picked a point where we had about 800 kilometers to go on this road, and traveling at, let's say, 120, 130 kilometers an hour. My mom was going to be fine for 6, 7 hours. All she had to do was stay on this main freeway. And so my father's switching seats, and he tells her, "Look, you don't have to worry." She's asking questions like, "When do I get off, and when do I have to exit?" And he said, "Don't worry, you're never going to have to exit. You're going to be on this forever. I'm just going to catch a couple hours of sleep." And so I'm in the back seat sleeping, and he goes into the passenger side and he starts to sleep, and we're driving along. And I'm awakened by my father screaming, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And the car is bouncing uncontrollably, like we're going over bumps and things. And I sit up, and we're not on the freeway. We're on a service road in a farm, which is like a dirt road full of bumps and full of holes. And we're driving between two cornfields in the middle of Kansas. And he is like yelling at my mother, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, I thought I was supposed to get off, and I'm trying to find home," and all this stuff. And, it takes us a while. I remember we pulled off, and then we got onto a main road. We got off this farm. We were in the middle of a farm. And we got off the road. We get to a gas station. We ask questions. We finally get back to the freeway. But she had driven maybe 15 or 20 kilometers off the freeway, and we ended up in a field. Now, at the time that occurs, I don't recognize anything. I'm 7 years old. My father, he loved her so much, and he put her on such a pedestal. He wasn't prepared to. There's a psychological condition that we call cognitive dissonance, when you don't want to deal with reality, and so you create your own reality in your mind. He created a lot of realities around my mother. He adored her, and he wasn't going to deal with she might have something wrong with her. And so the event kind of passed. It became a laughing story in the company, in the family. We would tell my brothers and sisters, and everyone would laugh and say, "Oh, Mom, my gosh, you can be so wild sometimes." And my mom would laugh and say, "I just got confused," and blah, blah, blah. That's story one. Story number two is we advanced to about 1974. I'm 11 years old. I'm at school, and my mom had to come get me after I had a late basketball practice. And getting from the school to my house was 4 left-hand turns that she was doing 2 to 3 times a day for 20 years. So let's say she did at minimum 10,000 times the trip from my school to our house. And so she picks me up, and I come out the car. I get in the car. I sit in the front seat. We do the first turn out of the parking lot of school. We're on the main road. We do the second turn successfully, and then we come to the third turn, which is a forked road. And it's not a full turn. It's a partial left-hand turn. She goes straight. And, I'm for a few seconds, I'm like, and we've never gone straight on that road ever. In fact, I don't even know what was back that road, because it was a road that we never, ever went on. And I didn't even know what the surroundings would look like. And we go maybe 100 meters or whatever. And I turned to my mom. I said, "Well, Mom, where are you going?" And she says to me, "I don't know where I am. Where do I go to get home?" And I'm ashamed of this today, and but I was a kid, and I was a dumb kid, and I didn't know any better. I was pretty mean. I was yelling at her. I'm saying, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm quite aggressive. And again, these terms like Alzheimer's and dementia don't exist. I mean, you don't deal with that. And my mother was in her mid 50s, late 50s. I mean, okay, maybe she was 60, 61. I mean, she wasn't like an old grandmother. I mean, she was still. I'm 60. She was my age. And she couldn't get her way home. And so I get her. I say, "You got to turn around." And we do this. And we get home. And again, I kind of like laugh it off and say nothing. My dad doesn't say anything. We let it go, because you don't want to confront those kind of things. That something might really be wrong, and you don't know any better. Then then it started to have the more serious things that led to questions. There was a family reunion. We all got together with all my brothers and sisters, and we were all in this place, and I was playing in the swimming pool with my nephews and nieces, and it was a great time. And there was some kind of family meeting going on that I wasn't invited to, but I was 12 years old. I didn't care. And it was my brothers and sisters meeting with my dad. And all I know is it went really bad because I'm in the pool swimming with my nephews and nieces, and everybody comes out of this room at the hotel. My sisters are crying, and they all come to the pool and they yell at their kids, "Kids, get up, we're leaving. Go get dressed, get out of the pool, let's go. Goodbye, goodbye, Jimmy." They wave to me, and I'm completely flabbergasted. And everyone's yelling, "Mom, why do we have to go? What's wrong?" And everybody's crying and drying their tears. And everybody leaves, and then we leave too. And so my dad comes to me and says, "Get out of the pool, get dressed, we're leaving." It was so sudden, and I kept asking in the car, "What's wrong? What happened?" And he's like, "Nothing, nothing. We just decided to go home." And okay, I'm a kid. I let it go, and only years later did I find out that that was the first family meeting that my brothers and sisters organized with my dad to say something is wrong with mom, and you got to take her for help. And they did it for my mom and they did it for me. And they said, "We don't like our little brother living in this house because she's going crazy." Now, what it did was it triggered my father, who was a very tough guy, to say, "All of you butt out of my life. This is my wife. This is your mother. How dare you say these things?" And he basically said, "I'm going to disown all of you and I'm going to cut you out of the will." And it was a big, huge family scandal. But my brothers and sisters, to try to help, confronted my father and tried to get this thing done. And then I progressed into the teen years. And, I wish I could say high school was just one big amazing, but it had a whole negative side. It started to really get bad, and it was more about forgetfulness. I would play sports, and I would say, "Mom, I'm not going to be home for dinner." I would come home, and there was like this plate sitting in the oven for 4 hours with a dried piece of meat on it, and all the vegetables were dried out from the heat. And she'd hear me come in, she'd come down and just rip into me and say, "I cooked you dinner and I waited for you and you don't have the decency to show up." And I would say, "Mom, I told you I'm not having dinner tonight. I'm at football practice." And she'd say, "You never told me that." And we'd have this huge fight. And every time we had the fight, my father took her side and said, "Don't you yell at your mother. Don't you treat her like that. Don't you ever accuse your mother of not remembering, or she was lying, or you are at fault. You are grounded. You're in trouble." And so it went. It was a very, very, very tough time. And the thing with Alzheimer's is that I lived in this dream world. Every time it hit rock bottom, you say, "Oh, we're now at rock bottom," and then you find a whole new rock bottom. So then I come home from school one day, and now I'm probably like 15 or 16. I come home and my dad is crying, and this guy never cried. I mean, he never cried. And he's crying and he goes, "I don't know what to do." And my mom is walking around the house and she's saying, "Where's dad? Where's dad? Where's dad?" And I said to her, and again, I wasn't very nice, and I'm not pleased with myself today in retrospect, but I didn't know what was happening. And I said to her, "What do you mean, where's dad?" And I thought she was talking about my dad, her husband. So I say, "He's right there." And she's like, "No, no, no, not him, my dad." And I literally looked at her and I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because her father had died when she was 20 in 1934. The guy had been dead for almost 50 years. Between 45 years, he'd been dead. She's looking for her dad, and I'm like, "What?" So we put her in the car and we take her to Dayton, Ohio, which is an hour away, where her father is buried. And we take her out into the cemetery, and we find his tombstone of my grandfather. And my dad says, "There's your dad's tombstone." She's reading it. Frank Karsh, that died in 1934. We take pictures of the tombstone, the whole bit. And she's like, "Oh, I do remember being here for the dad's funeral. Oh, okay." And, all the way back home, I'm telling my dad, I'm in the front seat, my mom's in the back. I said, "This is serious." And he's like, "She's always been like this. It's okay. She gets confused." And I said, "I'm sorry, but you don't get confused about somebody who's been dead for 45 years. I'm sorry, you don't." And we had this huge argument, and I said, "I'm sorry, but something is seriously wrong. This is not normal. You don't forget that your father's been dead for 4 decades." And, but then you say, "Well, that's the worst it'll get." Then after a couple of weeks, she started looking for her dad again. And he brings out the pictures. And then she gets very paranoid. She says, "You're trying to trick me. My dad is here. I just talked to him." And she wouldn't believe it. So we drove back to the cemetery. She didn't buy it. It was all a scam. And so then it got into a very tough time where she started to wander the streets looking for her father. And the police picked her up a few times, and we couldn't find her a few times. And it was really very scary and so stressful. And I was in high school, and by that point, I wouldn't bring any friend over to the house because she would always say, "What's your name? I've never met you." And it was so embarrassing, and I didn't know what to do. And I'm a kid, and the peer pressure was things. So I never brought friends around. I certainly never brought a girlfriend around, and I kept everybody away from my mom, basically to avoid. So I would go out and do stuff, and I was never at home. And I think I played 3 sports, not because I was such a sports fanatic, but I did anything to stay out of the house. And I tried as much as I could to come home when it was dark and to leave when it was dark in the morning and stay away as I could. Now, because she was wandering all the time and she was very aggressive, on things and could become violent. My father took a step that I think caused a whole nother set of steps. He put on deadbolts on every door in the house, but the deadbolt was a key bolt from both sides, so you couldn't open it from the inside without a key. And he locked her in the house, and she would go and check door to door to door and would check stuff. She was always trying to get out, and she became convinced that she was kidnapped and that she was being held hostage. And a couple of times she figured out how to dial. I don't know if then it was 911 or just zero, but we had the SWAT team come to the house and almost kill me because she called and said I'm being held hostage in my house, and that was a serious phone call. And the police came through the windows and stuff. It was serious. I mean, I was almost shot, and it was a serious thing. And it got worse and worse because in her particular Alzheimer's case, the memory went backwards. So she forgot the near term and she remembered the longer term. So me being the 7th child, under that scenario, guess who she forgot first? Me. She forgot who I was. I became a strange man. And my father had all kinds of heart issues, and he sometimes was in and out of the hospital. And so we got to a point where he was in the hospital with some heart pains, and they thought he had heart attacks and different things, and they would have to go in and scrape his arteries, and he had all these clogs in his arteries, and he had a minor stroke and all that. And I'm there alone with her, and I'm locked. We locked her in and all that. And by this time, my father had removed every knife and every pair of scissors from the house because she was always looking for weapons and because she was kidnapped and she was being held hostage. So she's going to stab and kill her way out of this thing. And so I was, because I wanted to watch TV and I was so stressed out, I was like sleeping in the living room most of the time, not in my bedroom. And I'm in there alone with my mother, and I locked her in and got her into bed. And she gives me this look in bed, and she looks at me with just pure hatred. She says, "I'm going to kill you." And I was like, oh, I'm forgiving. She doesn't know what she's saying. But, I'm her son, but she thinks I'm a stranger. And so she said, "I'm going to kill you." And I get her down in bed, and I'm laying there, and I can't sleep at all because all I hear is drawers opening and closing. She is going room to room looking for a weapon. And, I again live in this dreamland that my dad had got rid of, there's no scissors, there's no knives. The stove was turned off. I mean, she couldn't turn stoves and ovens on. She couldn't, he had completely Alzheimer proofed the house. And there was nothing left. We didn't even have butter knives. There was nothing. There was not a knife in the house. And he did everything to protect because she got very aggressive and she would pick up knives and try to stab you and stuff. And I finally fall asleep, and I had piled up pillows and part of the couch in front of the door coming into our family room. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's this crash. And my mother's coming over the things, and she has in her hand 2 crochet needles. So she found the weapon. And I go up to her to take them away, and she plants these crochet needles right in my back, stabs me. And it definitely hurt like heck. And I literally punched her. And I punched my own mother. And, I kind of knocked her dazed. And then, I called the police. And I called my oldest sister who came and everything. And I went to see my dad in the hospital, and he looked at me and he said, I want you to get out of the house tonight and never go back. I don't want you there anymore. This place is unsafe. And so I was still a teenager. I left the house and I never went back. And, my father passed away first, just shortly thereafter that. And then my mother died a few years later. Now, for me, she died the same day my dad died, because by the time he had died, she wasn't even speaking. And we had put her in a nursing home. That was a specialist unit for the first time I heard the words Alzheimer's. They had like an actual Alzheimer's unit. And they were advertising. And so we put her in a special nursing home that supposedly catered to that. Now, I don't think they really did, but we put her there, and I would go and sit with her, and she never knew who I was. I mean, she had completely forgotten me. But if my older sister walked in, she'd say, "Oh, hi, Arlene," and it'd pop right out of her mouth, and I would have done anything to hear her say that again. So she eventually couldn't eat, and it was every time you think you're at rock bottom, there's a new rock bottom in Alzheimer's, and the disease dramatically affected me. I was always telling people I'd rather get cancer, because I was fascinated that she could live and her body would function, but everything that made her my mother was gone. All the memories, everything was gone. And so, obviously at that point in time, this was the late 80s and stuff like that, the knowledge of the disease was limited, and then they knew there was a genetic factor, but they didn't know how much. Now, I think today people would say it's a multifactorial disease. There is a genetic element, but it's also heavily on the environment. With the rare cases of family Alzheimer's disease, which is passed purely genetically, and it's a gene mutation, and that disease represents a very small percentage of overall Alzheimer's cases. The vast majority of Alzheimer's, they can have a genetic element, but you can have an influence on the genetics through managing your lifestyle and diet and exercise and staying busy and keeping socially. There's a whole long list of factors that reduce the influence. And so at that time, we kind of theorized that it was a blend of genetics and that, but we were scared because my mother really developed the first significant Alzheimer's markers by 55. So, and she was gone by 62, 63. She was in bad shape. She was severely diminished cognitive function by 62, 63. So she had early stage, and we were quite terrified. And I was in my early 20s, but my siblings were in their 30s and even 40s. They were scared to death because I at least had time on my side. I mean, we would sometimes make these like crass jokes as siblings. I would say, the good thing about being last is I got like 30 years of research ahead of you guys to not get this. And, they'd kind of nervously laugh. And so I would look at everything that came out on Alzheimer's. I joined and I became the youngest board member of the Alzheimer's Association. I joined the Hamilton County Cincinnati chapter. I was on the board of directors. I organized for them the memory walk, and I put all kinds of fundraising in place for research. And you followed the research. And so, for example, in the late 80s, the first research came out that they had found aluminum plaques or parts of aluminum in the brain of Alzheimer's patients. And that caused a flurry of theories around, we know aluminum leaches from aluminum foil into food. We know that if you cook in aluminum pots and pans, that some level of aluminum, trace amounts of aluminum do leach into the foods. What did I do? Now, limited information. I think today the experts in Alzheimer's would say the jury is out on the aluminum link. There is aluminum there, but they haven't been able to figure out if it's part of it or not. That nobody would come and say aluminum is a risk to Alzheimer's, but we didn't know at that time. What did I do? I came home and told my wife, we will never use aluminum foil again. We go to wax paper. And I threw out every aluminum pot and pan in the house. I went out and bought Pyrex glassware, and I've cooked on Pyrex for the last 40 years. I've said I'm just not going to risk it. And there's no downside to taking aluminum out of it. We also, because my mother was such a unique case, the doctors begged us to allow an autopsy and to use her to help science, and we agreed. So when my mother passed away, we donated her body to the University of Cincinnati School of Medicine, and we allowed a full autopsy. I have the autopsy report, and a word kind of popped up in there. She was given the classic diagnosis of Alzheimer's, which at that point in time, this is going on 40 years ago, 35, 40 years ago. There was no easy test for Alzheimer's. It really had to be done at death at that point in time. And so when they did the autopsy on her brain, there was the classic amyloid plaques and the tau tangles of the tau proteins. And there was also the constant mention of this word inflammation, which, I was vaguely familiar with. But for me, inflammation was like acute type of inflammation, like from an injury, or if you're punched and you get red and bruising, that's inflammation. I wasn't really looking at inflammation from something like a brain inflammation standpoint. So that was the first time I was exposed to that word. And you had these events like the aluminum and other things come along. And then what happened was in 1999, I was very heavily in the wellness industry in the U.S. and was, even though I'm only a physiologist, by training, I was deeply involved in wellness and was spending a lot of private time on the Alzheimer's subject and on different boards and that. The Medical Wellness Association was formed in the United States. It's now a worldwide association of the leading physicians in more the world of preventative medicine, less on disease treatment, but more on keeping people healthy. And it's wellness leaders and that go after that philosophy of health. And I met numbers of people there, numbers of doctors that were very brilliant and very dedicated to health and understanding the role of health. But not they might be great doctors, but they may not be great marketers or great business people. And some of these guys had pretty amazing stuff done and pretty amazing research. And one of them I met in the early 2000s was a guy named Dr. John Lewis, who is a professor at the Miller School of Medicine at University of Miami in Miami, Florida, one of the top med schools in the U.S. Now, he didn't go there, and he's not a student there. He's teaching these kids. He's teaching the doctors of tomorrow. And Lewis's, one of his many specializations is neurodegenerative disorders. And he spends all of his time on Alzheimer's, MS, and Parkinson's, which are the three leading neurodegenerative disorders in the world today. And, he had a natural inclination towards health and towards wellness and towards supplementation. And he was interested if there was more natural ways to combat certain neurodegenerative disorders than just using traditional pharmaceutical medications, which are chemically based and which will always have some kind of side effect of some shape or form. Now, so many medicines have saved all of our lives and helped all of us. I have nothing against that, but we should also be open to other routes of helping people, not just a pharmacological approach to things. And, I had certainly had, my own experiences, and I've worked for major corporations like Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola in very senior roles, and I understand how these companies work, and they do good, but they do have to make a profit, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have to earn a profit. We have to pay back shareholders. But when you start talking about profit, you also have to look at how do you make profit sustainable, and you have to look at things like intellectual property. And one of the many reasons that companies will not go after natural substitutes and natural solutions is there's nothing proprietary on it. I mean, you can't patent vitamin C. You can't patent, vitamin D. You can't patent omega-3 fatty acid. You can't patent this stuff. So, even if it's helpful, why would a company, kill themselves to market something that a bunch of other people can copy? This is all factual and I understand it, but let's take as an example, lavender oil. I can tell you right now, and I've talked to enough dermatologists and I've done my own experimentation. If you get an insect bite, you can buy these expensive sprays under some brand name in a pharmacy. But if you take lavender oil and put one drop on that bite, you'll never itch again. It's gone. There will never be another itch. It's instantly gone forever. I mean, it's amazing. But nobody knows this because the people that do lavender oil don't market. They don't understand it. They're not big companies. And no major corporation is going to market lavender oil as an anti-itch agent or a dermatitis agent because you can't, there's nothing proprietary. Anybody can buy pure, 100% pure lavender oil on the market. And so, yes, I would tell you right now, the best anti-itch medication for topical dermatitis is lavender oil. But you don't know that because when you go into a store, it's not being sold for that. And you look at you go to the anti-itch section. There's all these sprays at X price under brand names and full of packaging. And lavender oil comes in a little bottle. It just says 100% pure lavender oil. There's no marketing. There's no anything. You have to know this. But I can give so many examples of where there are natural solutions that are actually superior to what might be commercially available. And so it wouldn't come as a shock that maybe a guy like Dr. Lewis would figure something out when it comes to neurodegenerative disorders. Now, he did tons of research and tons of looks, and he focused on inflammation. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, Lewis, in my opinion, was talking about inflammation as the backbone of disease long before it now is a modern item. He was talking about this 20 years ago. Now you'll read everything where, inflammation is the key. Inflammation is the name of the game. Inflammation is the backbone of all modern diseases. And if you look, cancer, the backbone is inflammation. All this rash of autoimmune disorders, of lupus, of rheumatoid arthritis, these are all inflammatory diseases. Alzheimer's disease is an inflammatory disease of the brain. Inflammation is at the root of Alzheimer's. At the root of Alzheimer's. And that was where he was going after, which is we as a society suffer from chronic inflammation, acute inflammation that comes with an injury or surgery, and you get inflammation around the sutures. That's normal inflammation and immune reaction. But chronic inflammation, the body struggles to deal with, and it gets worse with age. As you age, we get worse with dealing with inflammation. And if you look today, and I can make a general statement, the number one disorder in the modern world today is chronic inflammation among the population. We don't eat right. We're exposed to various toxins and various pollutions. We don't get the exercise we want. There's lots of things going on, but a lot of it is dietary based and getting the right elements that can help us control inflammation. So he went after the inflammation route, and how do I help manage brain inflammation? Now, different inflammation in different parts of the body leads to different inflammatory markers and then perhaps different nutritional or dietary ingredients to help. And he spent a lot of time doing base research at the University of Miami. This was done in their labs, this isn't like small base, somebody doing stuff at home. This was world-class funded research done in leading hospitals and leading universities in Miami, Florida, at the University of Miami. He developed a formula, which had several different ingredients that had already the pedigree of helping reduce brain inflammation and helping increase positive anti-inflammatory markers in the body. The ingredients were a bi-aloe derivative or a derivative of the aloe vera plant, a number of other ingredients, but the big one was something called a polysaccharide, which had all kinds of research showing that had a tremendous reduction in inflammation, specifically cytokines, which are a big part of brain inflammation and a big part of Alzheimer's disease. And he put together this formula, and they ran a clinical study. This clinical study is like almost a decade old now. And it was run for 1 year among severe to moderately severe Alzheimer's patients, run in all the lab work done at University of Miami. It was done with a major hospital, Jewish hospital in Miami. They supplied the patients, and they did a full batteries of testing. Now, what they were just looking for was the goal was just to hold their cognitive markers, because what happens with Alzheimer's, as you know from my mother's story, is it is progressively degenerative. It doesn't, every day gets worse than the last day. And so if you can hold the cognitive performance, and they were using a test called the ADAS cognitive, which is Alzheimer's disease assessment scale. This is the gold standard test to assess the degree of Alzheimer's. It's on a 0 to 70 scale. The lower the number, the better. So if you have no cognitive impairment, your score is 0. If you have the most severe cognitive impairment, you're at 70. The average of the people in the study were in the high 40s, in the low 50s and high 40s. So they were quite impaired, and they were in a moderate to severe Alzheimer's state. Now, they gave them the supplement every day. There was clearly no negative effects because polysaccharide really comes from rice bran. And so, this is all part of the natural food. Aloe vera plant, all of this is edible and it's been well documented for toxicity. And so they gave this, and they did at 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. They administered the ADAS cognitive test, which is the Alzheimer's gold standard test. And they did batteries of blood work on top of that. Now, what the goal was, could they even hold it or decelerate the rate of progress of Alzheimer's? Because if you look at all the prescription medication on Alzheimer's, nobody gets better. They just simply decelerate the rate of decline. So if you put your loved one on this medication, they will still get worse, but they'll go slower than they normally would. And there's real value in that. I went through this. Anything that could extend her memory a little bit longer was a welcome thing. So there's nothing wrong with slowing it down. It's a wonderful outcome. But could we stop it, or could we maybe even get a little bit of improvement? The goal of the study was just to see if we could kind of halt the progression of the Alzheimer's through the testing, the cognitive testing, by an underlying basis of reducing the inflammatory response in the human brain. They did it. Now, at 3 and 6 months, there was really no change. In fact, there was some decline. Then suddenly at 9 months, there was statistically significant improvement. And at 12 months, even more statistically significant improvement, which was quite mind-blowing. The product actually improved the cognitive function of severe to moderate Alzheimer's patients. Now, as far as I know, and I was blown away when I saw this, this is the only study peer-reviewed, published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. I mean, this wasn't just made up. This was peer-reviewed by panels of doctors and was published publicly. You can go and read it online. This study is the only study I know of that has shown an improvement in cognitive function among Alzheimer's patients. That was pretty mind-blowing. Now, what was the level of improvement? It was statistically significant, but it wasn't mind-blowing. Like, they went from the average improvement was 4 points, which is statistically significant. So a 48 became a 44. They didn't suddenly get back to normal and suddenly do everything, but they did improve on their cognitive function when normally they would be in continual decline. So that was quite a shocker. And I certainly used, my mother was long dead when I saw this research, but I bought the product for my brothers and sisters. I bought it for friends, and I started taking it as a prophylactic because I still will always be afraid I'm going to get this. And so, there's nothing wrong with reducing brain inflammation. So when I started to take it and give it to people I loved, it was quite interesting. Numbers of interesting stories. Like one family, their father was full-blown Alzheimer's, lost the ability to speak and all that. He was a mathematician. He was on it, and after about 6 or 7 months, he started to speak a little bit, and they started to ask him questions. And they started to give him math questions. Now, the math questions were not complex. They were, what is 30 plus 20? It was pretty easy stuff. But he was answering. He would say 50. And they would say, what's 10 times 50? And he would say 500. Now, he wasn't doing calculus, and he wasn't doing differential equations, and he wasn't doing advanced accounting, but he was doing basic stuff. And you know what? I had this video of him, and all the kids are laughing, and they're saying, Dad, what's this? And he would answer, and then they would all clap. And what the one daughter told me was it was the most wonderful time to have a little bit of Dad back. And how do you put a price on that? I mean, I would have given anything if my mom would have called my name one more time. If she would have said one more time, she called me Jimmy, If she would have looked at me and say, "Hey, Jimmy, how are you? I love you," I'd give anything if I could have heard that again. I've had other people write and say, "We gave this to my uncle. He had forgotten all of us, and now he remembers at least our names." Now, again, he didn't come all the way back and tell stories for hours, but he got some, as there was some removal of inflammation, he got some memory back. And that's a pretty amazing thing. And nobody knows about this product because it was published in a journal that is an obscure journal on Alzheimer's. It was developed by brilliant people who don't know how to market. They don't have a publicity department that knows how to do a press conference with USA Today and CNN and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you look at drugs like Ozempic, and that being developed, these are being developed by very, very well-run companies that have good marketing departments. The minute that was all validated and approved, there's press cons. It's in every single news site. It's in Fox. It's in CNN. It's in MSNBC. It's in BBC. It's all, and you already got demand. This study comes out, which is probably the most impactful study on improving Alzheimer's patients that's ever been done. Nobody knows about it. Now, the product, and why don't they know about it? Because who wants to sell this stuff? It only costs $50 a month. You can't make, it's not like a proprietary, patented, blah, 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 blah. You can get it pretty easily and it's quite cheap. So it's not big money. It's not big money like a prescription medication that's like $50 a day. It's $50 a month. So I understand, and I'm not upset. I'm not, being unreasonable at all. I understand that companies have to make profit and they have to find a business model that works. But, all of us have a certain responsibility to understand our health and to do our own research. And so I knew about this product for over a decade, and I used the product for over a decade. When I eventually came to find in the Middle East, which is a wellness company, we do hygienic paper net, I felt that maybe our company could help bring this to other people. And so we took out a license on it from Dr. Lewis and from the team, and we sell it under the name Motiva Neuro Booster, Motiva Neuro Booster, and you can look it up on Motiva Supplements, oneword.com, and you can buy it there. We ship it worldwide. It's sold at very reasonable. It's $50 a month to get it, and you can bring in a couple of months and try it. It's not expensive. You're looking at $1.50 a day for someone that you care about, and you can go on our website. All of these studies are published. The studies are put up on our website. You can read the whole thing, and you can check it out. And this is like my crowning achievement. Why I would do a talk like this, because it's very simple, very, very simple. I'm 60 years old now. When my mom was my age, she was already in bad shape. I don't have any symptoms that I know of. Now, maybe my wife is listening to this laughing and saying, he forgets this. But as far as I know, I'm doing good in my job and my memory's pretty sharp and I'm on my game. And I take good care of myself, and this product has been a part of my regimen for a decade. And managing inflammation has been a part of my life for a decade. This is probably my last job in my life. I'm 60 years old. It's not like people are beating down the door to hire me. Okay, I'm 60 years old. And for me, this is a crowning achievement. I'm going to do something to help other people avoid, to some degree, what I went through as a young man with my own mother, who I know loved me dearly, and who it's not her fault and the things happened. But, she did, from a lifestyle perspective, everything wrong. She didn't eat right. She didn't exercise. She didn't keep her mind active. She wasn't socially engaged with friends and that. Her whole life was her kids and her husband. She, if you look at the list of ways to minimize the risk of Alzheimer's, she didn't do any of them. So, she had the genetics, and then you add everything else, and she was a prime case of getting early stage Alzheimer's. I'm not going to be that person, and I'm going to try and help as many people as I can. I would certainly do the research, look at ways to reduce your inflammation, which can go from supplementation to fasting. I mean, go and Google fasting and Alzheimer's. Read the research. It's pretty impressive. And why does fasting help? Because it reduces inflammation. This inflammation angle is interesting. It's not the only angle. And there are many other research angles, and I fully support and applaud all of it. But the inflammation angle is a legitimate angle to helping alleviate, not cure, not fix, not eliminate, but alleviate the societal impact of Alzheimer's on the world today. And our company has spent all of its energy focusing on reducing chronic systemic inflammation in the human body because that is the backbone of so many ills in our world today. So that's my story. That's our product, Motiva Neuro Booster. I see a few people have asked questions. We will I'll write you a message right back as soon as I'm done here. I am happy to take as many questions as you want. As again, I'm a physiologist by training. I have been involved with medical wellness and a lot of the research, but I would never say I'm an expert on Alzheimer's. I have lived through it, which many people have not that would say they're experts, but the disease has touched me on a very visceral, personal level. And this is a kind of a way that I can honor my mother by doing these types of things. The only reason we brought Motiva into Fine was me. It was a personal mission of mine, and I have a wonderful team like Basel and like Elia Nukul, who leads our wellness group. They're wonderful and they believe in it and they take it and they love it. And even Elia made a comment to me last week, like I stopped taking Neuro Booster and I started to have a bit of brain fog. We have a lot of people here that take it as a prophylactic, and brain fog, we don't know much about it, but it's probably inflammatory based as well. So anything that reduces that inflammation is a positive when we're talking about chronic systemic inflammation, not acute inflammation. So that's the story. And I'm honored that you would give up a bit of your time to even listen to me talk. My own children don't listen to me talk. So to have a group of strangers listen to me talk is a deep honor for me. And I deeply appreciate it. And I'm always here to answer questions. If you want to reach out to me, I'm right there on LinkedIn. I'm quite there. You can always talk to me. I will answer your messages as best I can. And again, I'm ready to take any Q&A that we want to do right now.
Thanks a lot, James. And we wanted to express really our heartfelt gratitude for your captivating talks today, especially the insight on your personal story. If you don't mind, we do have Hamza. Please, Hamza, unmute yourself and share your comments or question.
Hi everyone, how are you? James, it's a pleasure meeting you online. I'm Hamza Noor and I am the youngest president and founder in the world to run the first and only Alzheimer's Association in Jordan. Happy World Alzheimer's Day to everybody. Today we're celebrating World Alzheimer's Day. It has been quite a roller coaster ride ever since I started the Alzheimer's Association back in 2015 when my aunt got diagnosed at the age of 45 with frontotemporal dementia. Having Motiva with us on board is such a pleasure and an honor for all of us. And we can't wait to do a lot more with you guys, with Knuckle Group, and with Motiva in Jordan.
Well, absolutely. I mean, thank you so much, Hamza. And, we're happy to work with you. And, Jordan is our home. And we are proudly, a Palestinian, Jordanian founded company. And we embrace our roots. Even though I'm in Dubai, we love Jordan is way beyond emotional for us in the Nukul Group. It is our homeland. And so we want to serve in every way we can, including bringing more awareness to this disease, which I certainly think is a global, given the lifestyle factors that drive it, given if you look at the correlation factors of type 2 diabetes, obesity, smoking incidents. I mean, Jordan suffers from these very same maladies that will lead to early stage.
Alzheimer's is the seventh leading death cause in Jordan too.
Yeah, so we see it, and we're happy to play a role. I'm a big believer in a holistic approach, not just taking a supplement and still smoking a shisha, and and never going to the gym. I'm a big believer in taking a holistic view, which is by all means take Motiva, but on top of that, let's get you started with some walking. Let's try to reduce the shisha usage. Let's try to reduce the carbohydrate intake. Let's try to get the type 2 diabetes under control. Let's start eliminating risk factors that will lead to it, because as we talked early on, it's a multi-variable disease. Genetics plays a role, but there's lots of things that play a role in Alzheimer's developing. And so by doing as many things as we can, we reduce that risk.
100%. We just got back from Qatar. I was in Qatar the other day, just came back last night. And we are now working on the Global Dementia Action Plan to Jordan and to Arab world. So definitely Motiva and the group would definitely be part of it as well. I'll keep you guys working because we're trying to get get patients into the health insurance companies, but in a way or another. And we're trying to work on so many different aspects as well. Of course, awareness is always the key. And I know that you guys are always here for us. And then and I'm sure that you've heard about the World Alzheimer's Month theme for this month it's about reduce risk reduction, never too early and never too late. Those are the official hashtags for World Alzheimer's Month. And if everybody can follow them, they would know more about what's going on for this September too. But thank you for everything. Well done.
Thank you, Hamza, for your comments. James, we do have a question. Can Motiva Neuro Booster be taken by everybody or only people with Alzheimer's?
No, I think it's. I've been taking it for years, as I was explaining, and I certainly don't have any cognitive decline whatsoever. So it can be taken as a prophylactic. We've had a number of people. Again, it's not one or two; it's dozens and hundreds that, especially that after they had COVID, and it's interesting. I mean, when you look at the COVID, the thing that killed you with COVID, why did some people die and some people didn't, was what was called a cytokine storm. Cytokine is a major inflammatory marker, and some people would get this storm that would overwhelm the body with inflammation, lead to multiple organ failure, and they would die, and other people would recover. What's the difference? One of the key beliefs is what was your base level of inflammation? The people that they kept saying were high risk were the people that had diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity. Yeah, those are the exact profile of people that have chronic inflammation. So it's not because you're obese, it's because you were inflamed because you're obese. Then when you get the COVID infection, the cytokines, your body is already overwhelmed by inflammation. You get then this extra amount of cytokines because of infection, and it overwhelms the body and they die. Other people are less inflamed. They handle the inflammation of the illness and they go on. Now, what I have found interesting, but I'm not able to find the research at least yet to understand it, is that there are different inflammatory markers in the body that impact different organs differently. Now, cytokine was a significant part of the reaction to the COVID-19 virus. When you look at Alzheimer's and brain inflammation, one of the key drivers up there is a cytokine. So it's the same inflammatory marker that was part of COVID. And one of the byproducts of COVID of many people I know was been brain fog. Brain fog. Now, I wonder, I don't have any data, I'm just stating a wonderment. They both share the cytokine link. So I have to wonder if that wasn't part of the whole brain fog of COVID, was back to the actual instance of cytokines. Now, that is a known brain inflammatory marker of cytokines. This product is very good against cytokines. So why wouldn't I take that? Because there's other things that cause brain inflammation, from environmental factors to dietary factors to even an injury. Brain injury can cause dramatic increase in inflammation. So I think it can be taken by anyone. I think the negative of the product is it doesn't taste very good, and it's mixed I would mix it in a juice or something. It's not the best tasting in the world. I wish we could do like a dark chocolate flavor, but we're not. We may come with capsules at some point. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but I'm certainly highly motivated to take it. I mean, if that's what I have to put up with to keep my brain sharp, I'm going to do it. So I think it can be for anyone who has had issues with brain fog, who's had issues with focus sometimes, because those could have an element of inflammation involved in those very subtle symptoms of things like inability to stay focused, inability to concentrate. You don't know what can be the drivers of that. I mean, I'll tell you a side story. To understand fasting and the role of fasting, I went to the world leading clinic of fasting, which you can look it up. It's called the Buchinger Wilhelmi Clinic in Germany. They've been doing extended fasting, and they publish more research on fasting than any other organization in the world. And it's based in Germany on the shores of Lake Constance. It's been around since the 1940s, and it is an institution run by doctors. I went there to experiment with inflammation and with doing an extended fast under full medical supervision. Okay, this wasn't just some fat farm. That's not it. I went for health, and it was doctors and nurses. I was checked and blood work every week, and I was checked every day by doctors and nurses. I was weighed in and doing everything and checking all kinds of vital signs and blood markers. Now, when I went there, because you sit around and you don't eat, I went 13 days with no food except the small bone broth that we would have at lunch and dinner. I had about 100 calories a day, and it was only in bone broth, and then I could drink all the water I wanted, and then I did take this is all doctor controlled. When I started to feel a little bit of cramping, they put me on, a supplement that gave me the magnesium, potassium, sodium, the electrolytes to keep everything in balance. I was continually monitored by physicians. This is not some dumb stuff. It was done at a very established place. Now, here's the interesting side note. By day 7 or 8, I had taken with me a Sudoku puzzle book that was at the level, they called it like double black belt. This is a killer. It was like the highest level Sudoku that you could buy. I had bought that book. Now, my solve rate in normal life on these Sudoku puzzles was about 1 out of 3. 2 out of 3, I just couldn't solve them. I would eventually get to where I had to cheat and go to the back of the book and look at and get a clue to then come back and solve the puzzle. So I was about 1 out of 3. By day 7, I was 8 out of 10 solve rate. I was solving everything. And my brain was like a bloody computer. It reminded me of college when your brain was like working at light speed. And it was amazing. There is something to the whole question of brain inflammation, cytokines in the brain, the role of reducing inflammation in the body and in the brain, of which not only supplementation and products like Motiva are great, but also things like even fasting, intermittent fasting. But extended fasting is even more powerful because you go into autophagy much more in a detailed way with an extended fast than you do with short-term fasting and intermittent fasting. It takes time for the body to fully go into an autophagy state, which is when you're really your body is cleaning up misfolded proteins, which are tau proteins, like in the brain for Alzheimer's, or they're eliminating abnormal cells and destroying those cells and cleaning them up. So, this is all relatively new in the world. In the scientific world, relatively new. It's not completely new, but relatively new, where there's still not a high awareness of this. I mean, we were telling people when I was in the wellness world, you should eat every 90 minutes. And if you don't, your metabolism will stop and you'll get fat because your metabolic rate will slow and all that. We now know that's all false. The metabolic rate, as long as you don't touch your insulin levels, you don't impact your metabolic rate through fasting. If you fast and you nibble on bread, okay, now you can slow down your metabolic rate because of the impact of insulin and elevated insulin on the body's ability to go into ketosis. But you go and look at the research, read the research on it. It does not slow your metabolic rate. But we were telling people what we thought we knew at the time. Science is always evolving. That's what makes it fascinating. We're always learning new things, and sometimes we learn that we were wrong. And that's okay. As long as we correct ourselves, then it's okay to learn these things.
Thank you, James. Thank you. James, we do have Imad with us. So, Imad, please unmute yourself and share your question.
Yes, hello to all, and thank you very much for this wonderful session. I had a quick question about the Motiva Neuro Booster being a supplement.
Yep.
Did you witness any side effects to it, if I may ask?
No, I had none, and I don't know of anybody having none other than if I know of a few people that tried to take it with water. Look, it doesn't taste good. I'm not going to kid you. It's not. It's not that it. In fact, it's not that it doesn't taste good. It doesn't really. It kind of tastes bad. And so what people I know a number of people did was they took it with water. And when you take it with water, you get the full taste. And I know a few people had some gag reflex. And they say like you almost kind of like vomit it up because it tastes so bad in your mouth. And for me, the solution was easy. You can take this with a juice. You can put it with tomato juice or orange. I mix it with a multi veggie juice that I blend every morning that has lettuce and celery and cucumber. I tend to pick watery based vegetables, and I try to take more vegetable juice than fruit juice to reduce the fructose content, reduce the insulin response. But if I mix it with the juice, it's fine. And that's the only thing. If you look at the clinical study that was published, there was 2 cases out of all the patients. One was loose stools, and the other was slight digestive disorder, which both were repaired. If you read the full study in detail, they will tell you there was 2 people that had some negative effects. They were both digestive, and they both were fixed by not taking the full dose and gradually working up to the full dose. So the study protocol was full dose from day 1, which was 4 teaspoonfuls a day. What they did with those 2 people is they did week 1 was 1 teaspoon, week 2 was 2, week 3 was 3, and by week 4 they got to the full amount. That change enabled their body to adjust to whatever was in there that was maybe causing a bit of gastric distress, and then they were fine. So that's the beauty of the supplement world, is that we are not dealing with chemicals that we have to study side effects. We're dealing with naturally occurring substances that are a part of our fundamental food groups to begin with. This is the primary ingredient in this is a rice bran derivative. It's the husk of the rice, of a rice grain, the husk of it that's removed in white rice and it remains in brown rice. That brown coating, it's an ingredient that's in that. I mean, if you're eating rice, you're eating this all the time. So that's the beauty of why I love natural solutions, is that we don't have to worry about liver toxicity and kidney toxicity and things like that. We might have to look at things like drug interaction. If you take our other Motiva product, which is curcumin, curcumin is a blood thinner, so you can have some negative reactions if you're taking certain prescription medication. So, before you would take a curcumin, you should consult your physician just to look at drug interaction. But the curcumin itself does not have negative side effects. It's simply, it might interact with something else you're taking that is a pharmaceutical grade product. That's all. So,
Thank you, Jim.
It is an off-the-shelf product, isn't it?
Well, this is described as off the shelf. Now, we're not on many shelves in the world, because we don't have a big sales force and we don't go in and try to do it. And if we went on shelf, the prices would go up because the retailer would take a markup. So we try to keep the pricing down by going direct to consumer through global e-commerce. Now, in the UAE, we are on shelf in some pharmacies and that. We are on shelf in some health food stores. But, worldwide, you can't find it. You can't go into a GNC in the U.S. and find Motiva. We don't have the capability to do that.
What I meant, you don't need a prescription for it.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Imad.
Thanks.
We almost reach our end, James. Thanks for all the insight. We will give just one more round for a question from the audience. If you have, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we are good to close the session of today, James. Again, on behalf of all, we would like to thank you by sharing your personal story. And also, we are grateful for our lovely audience With their question and engagement, they enrich the session. Looking forward, and I hope this session to be remembered. Again, thank you, James.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you wherever you are in the world.